From boardroom meetings to bedtime stories, Coffee in the Barn explores the delicate dance of balancing the demands of our professional lives with the joys and responsibilities of being moms. Join us each week as we discuss the latest trends in agribusiness, share insightful interviews with industry experts, and sprinkle in some heartfelt anecdotes about the humorous and heartwarming moments that come with being a working mom in agriculture. Welcome back to this week's episode of Coffee in the Barn. This week, we have the privilege of speaking with Tracy Eliszewski, nurse practitioner and entrepreneur, and I would say a family friend. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Tracy Eliszewski, nurse practitioner. I work in Monona, Wisconsin, right near Madison right now. And I switched from kind of the traditional medicine model to more of the integrative functional medicine, kind of regenerative medicine area of medicine. So what that means is really my whole goal is health prevention, which really does not happen in our traditional medicine setting right now. And it's a lot of optimization. So cellular medicine, we look at a lot of labs and we just kind of say like, where is the inflammation coming from and how do I optimize all of that? So I'm excited to be here. It's a lot to untangle, I know. So, but yeah, I'm happy to be here.
You see and treat a lot of different things. And so I think the insight that you can provide on this week's topic is going to be really beneficial in how we talk about, how does our gut and our brain talk back and forth through the different hormones that everyone has in their body, how we regulate those, as well as how different external factors like stress and exercise and just things that we do on a day-to-day basis can alter and influence those hormones and natural functions of our body, I should say.
Yeah. So the gut-brain connection, right? So I always say like your gut is your second brain. Right. It's really important to have a well-balanced gut, right? And to make sure that you're having, that's my first question for my patients is like, how do I know that? Right. So making sure that you're having 1 to 2 daily bowel movements a day, right? Making sure you're not having bloating or distension, right? Having a pristine gut means you're not really having a lot of symptoms there and your bowel movements look normal, honestly. And so when you have a nice working gut, right, your brain is going to work better. Right, essentially. It's also our gut is where we house our immune system. So, as we get older, our immune system is more dependent on having that good gut-brain connection as well. And it's also where we make our serotonin, which is our 90% of our serotonin, which is our happy hormone, right, is made in the gut. So all of that is so important. I see and treat patients for a lot of gut health issues, and sometimes it's not uncommon for somebody to come into me and say like, I've had 15 years of constipation, and like I'm just like, oh my gosh, we have to fix this, right? And because that is so important, if we talk about not only making you feel good, but that's also where we cleave our hormones and our toxins, right? If we're talking about just detoxing, right, you have to either sweat, you have to urinate, or you have to go to the bathroom. And so for hormones specifically, women and men, if you're not going to the bathroom every single day, you're not detoxifying, right? You're not detoxing your toxins, right? And you're not detoxifying your hormones. So there are a couple different enzymes specifically that I'll look at. One is called beta glucuronidase. And if that's elevated, then I can tell you that you are somebody that's probably more recirculating toxins and hormones as well. There's a lot of hormonal detoxification that happens in the gut as well. So that's really, really important for my patients. So we look at that on a stool test. I can also look at that a little bit in blood work, but it's really important to have that good gut-brain connection so we can detoxify hormones and toxins at the same time.
So what would you say are the top 5 hormones? What do they mean?
Yes.
Or why are they important?
Top 5.
And what do they do that are just kind of, those key ones that we need to be knowledgeable of?
Yes. So every single patient that I sit down with, the ones I'm screening for, right, is, and this is because hormones are on every single cell receptor of the body except for red blood cells, I believe. So they're everywhere and they're all talking to each other. So I always say hormones are these like really, really sensitive little effective communicators around the body. So what I look at is I look at a lot of your sex hormones, which is your estrogen, your testosterones, your progesterones. It is your thyroid hormones. So making sure all of your thyroid, there's more than just one thyroid hormone. So I look at all of those to make sure that those are optimal. Cortisol and stress. So making sure that your cortisol levels, and then blood sugar and insulin resistance. So those those are the biggest ones, because I think that's the easiest one to just kind of start with and start to optimize. But knowing that, what I say to my patients is I can optimize your sex hormones and your thyroid hormones, but if that cortisol and that stress hormone is through the roof, right? If you're not sleeping and you're waking up in the middle of the night, or you can't turn your brain back off, that's a cortisol issue. And so cortisol is like the stealer of all the hormones. So it'll start stealing from, and it's really hard to regulate the more downstream hormones, because really how it works in the body is cortisol, right, is that fight or flight hormone. And so if you're, the textbook analogy is like the running from a bear, right? Running from a bear analogy. So if you're running from a bear and cortisol is going up, what has to happen is blood sugar has to go up, because you got to run from this bear for the next 2 miles, right? And then what happens after that is your sex hormones go down, your thyroid hormones go down, your growth hormone goes down. It's this repetitive cycle of why it's important to look and evaluate at all of that, because that's cellular medicine, right? We're evaluating and optimizing all of that. So yes, you feel good, but we're also talking about preventing, future health, or optimizing future health aspects too. So top 5 hormones, I would say, I'd group them a little bit, but I talk about cortisol and stress hormones. I talk about insulin and blood sugar regulation hormones. Sex hormones, obviously, that makes us kind of a lot of who we are, right? So making sure optimized hormones, whether you're, 20, whether you're 40 and going like perimenopause, or 45 and perimenopause, or postmenopausally, right? That's a huge area of research, more than now than ever, I think, is, having some hormone versus having no hormone, right? The gold standard traditional medicine training is, oh, hormones are terrible postmenopausally, right? And that's just simply not the case. And so for my women that are coming into me and they've lost energy, they have no libido, they have no lean muscle mass, they have no, it's important to have all of that working together. But cortisol, I feel like, is the one that I always put cortisol in a red box, because if cortisol, it's the one thing that, like, I don't prescribe hydrocortisone to people. I don't just prescribe those things, because what happens if you're stressed, right? So nice, beautiful day, this is the way I say this. In a nice, beautiful day, what should happen is your cortisol should spike first thing in the morning and kind of get you up and ready for the day, right? And then as the day goes on, it starts to come down nice and low, so that by the time you go to bed, turn your brain off, sleep 9 hours of uninterrupted sleep, and have the same thing happen. Well, a lot of my patients are like, I can't even get to sleep, right? I can't turn my brain off to get to sleep, or I'm waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and I can't turn my brain back off, or I'm tired at 3 p.m., right? There's a lot of cortisol involved in that, and that's the dysregulation of this. And when cortisol is high, right, it affects every single hormone, right? So it's really about balancing that. There are things in the cortisol picture, why I put it in the red box, because a lot of times it's up to you, right? So one of the hardest conversations for me to have is, I have lots of guys that are like, or in women, right? They're like competitors. They're going to CrossFit. They're working out. They're doing HIIT. Like they're doing all these really crazy things. But one particular patient, he's very well known. He's like probably the strongest man I've ever seen in my life, and he wasn't getting anywhere in the gym. He had hit this plateau, and I was like, "You're gonna hate me for me telling you what to do right now." I said, you need to figure out what activity is going to give you an actual, you're going to feel good after the activity, not just, I need to go home and take a nap. Because if your workout is causing you to go home and take a nap, right, not because you're tired and you just lifted hard, but you're just extremely fatigued and can't keep up, working out is still a cortisol activity, right? It's a provoking activity. So that's really where listening to your body and doing more of those like cortisol adrenal supportive activities, like walking, right? Or yoga, meditation, like those stuff that we don't give enough importance to, really do help. And so for that guy, I took him, I was like, 2 weeks, just give me 2 weeks. You can still lift, but don't be doing stuff that like you're going to pass out, in the gym, or like you need to come home and take a nap. And honestly, like after that 2-week break, he started to lift, and he started to lift more, right? He was in this cortisol plummeting time in his life. And so, when your cortisol is spiking, which is what, kind of wakes you up at 2 a.m., or eventually your cortisol has to come down, and then you get this plummeted line, this flatlined cortisol level. And that's where you get this like wired and tired, you're exhausted, but you can't turn your brain off. And so we have to pick that back up, because if we don't, the rest of your hormones are going to suffer downstream too.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I can really relate that back to, like, endurance sports that I've been involved in. And, we when we're training for endurance sports, you train in phases. Mm-hmm. Because you can't push yourself too hard, too fast. Otherwise, like you're going to plateau. You're not going to be able to be making any progress.
For sure.
So it's how do
For
you build on the strengths that you already have anaerobically and aerobically and get better as you go on.
Totally. Yes, as a runner, for sure. Right. You guys, my heart is patience, because it's like you can't, you have to listen to that fight or flight hormone at the same time. And that's like how you train, but you have to give yourself that rest at the same time. You have to build in those rest days, because if not, like you can be on a plateau for a long time.
I know you were an athlete too growing up, and
yeah,
I don't think that I gave myself as much credit until I started doing like long distance sports. And then when I became pregnant and a mom, that it's amazing how much more in tune with our bodies we are.
Yeah.
And you can tell when something is off.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's sometimes hard to like put a word to it, but you're just like, I'm just not feeling where I should be feeling right now.
Yeah, 100%. Especially like, hormonally, right? Like I've listened to a lot of naturopaths and even OBGYNs talk about this. Like it can take a full 2 years for a woman. I would say some probably would say even 3 years, right? It takes a long time for women to recover, right? After having a baby, there's a lot of hormones involved. And it takes to get your body back, right? Like there's a lot to motherhood. There's a lot to pregnancy. There's a lot to postpartum. You're trying to figure out how to be a mom. And then if you are working, like, how do I do that on top of it? Like there's a whole lot to that. And I think we just need to do a better job of like giving ourselves that grace too, or like to say like, okay, like I don't have to be myself in 2 months, right? I don't have to just like snap back to things. And I'm a huge proponent of that for sure.
How would you say how does your gut talk to your brain as far as like how do we know it's good or bad, I guess?
Yeah, like your nervous system, right? So a lot of times, like what we say in functional medicine is you start by healing the gut, everything else is going to improve. So your brain, right, your mood can improve vastly so there's a strong connection between that, like that intercommunication that happens in the body for sure. The question is like, again, like how do I know if my microbiome is optimal, right? And so you can take, like, there's some good probiotics. I think the conversation with probiotics is I do a lot of stool testing, right? I don't know, do you guys do that in animal testing? I'm assuming, right? Or do you guys do any kind of stool analysis?
Yep. So most of the time it's just subjective stool scoring.
Yeah.
Scale to 1 to 5 based on color and texture. At our large scale facilities, we don't necessarily always do that because it is so subjective, but at the universities they have like metabolic cages that they can put a group of pigs in or a small subset of animals, and they can collect all the urine and feces and even measure CO2 output and anything that comes out of the animal they can collect all the data on. So we can kind of do that with
so very, very similar. Yeah. So you can always do a stool test. A stool analysis will tell me like what and it's a snapshot, right? Like, but it'll tell me what what flora are the highest in you. Are you overgrown in certain bacteria? Are you undergrown in certain bacteria? When it comes to probiotics, I think they're great. I think this is kind of the way my philosophy on everything, right? The body's very smart and it will adapt to certain things. So when I was in my GI rotation in NP school, right, the GI doctors love to prescribe Floragen as a probiotic, which is the #1 branded probiotic. It's a lactobacillus strain. Well, I have patients that come to me and they'd be like, oh yeah, I take a probiotic. I've been in Floragen for like 12 years. I'm like, oh, I can't imagine what your lactobacillus looks like in there, right? And so I like to kind of do things. I'm like, okay, do this for 3 to 6 months and then let's change it up, right? So you can get a lot of different strains of probiotics. There's spore-based probiotics. We actually have a little bit of a killer in there too. But I like to kind of to change it up because our bodies do get used to things. It's like working out, right? You do different workouts because you want to create that muscle, you want to build the muscle and not do the same workout every single day. So I do the same thing with probiotics and just having that like pristine gut. So if you have a lactobacillus perfect, the next time maybe grab a Phylloramyces or something like that. Just kind of depends on what symptoms you're having too.
Yeah, that's really interesting that like you're highlighting the balance. You need to have a balance of, there's a lot of different good bacteria in
Definitely
gut and in animal's gut, and you need to have a balance of them all.
For sure.
You highlighted a very important point, because that's been kind of one of our key research areas, has been how fibers play into the gut health of the animal. And so we've tested a variety of different soluble and insoluble fibers, as well as combinations of both, to kind of hone in on what combination we think is the best for pigs specifically, because that's where we're doing our research. And it's been very interesting that we've found, so this unique combination of soluble and insoluble fibers during a health challenge. So when pigs are experiencing some sort of enteric challenge, the pigs that are fed this high fiber diet come out a lot better in the end than those that are not fed this fiber combination. And when I say come out better, I'm saying like normally, pushing the animals to grow. I don't want to say as fast as possible, but we're pushing them to grow. And in some cases, especially when they're experiencing some sort of enteric challenge or health challenge, they can't put their resources towards growth because their immune system is going to trump growth. And so with this fiber combination, we've been able to slow the pigs down a little bit and not push them as hard, so that they do have the resources to continue to maintain slow growth and eat what they need, but also be able to recover and maintain their gut integrity during this health challenge.
For sure. Fiber, you could do a whole podcast on fiber, right? Like fiber is, I always say it's the number one supplement no one talks about and everyone needs. So, and you can get it through your diet, but our goals are like 20 to 40 grams of fiber. So fiber is a detoxer, right? It's kind of like a low dose binder, right? You help pull toxic load. When it gets hard is like, you're going to have a lot of my patients are like, it's the healthier I eat, the more salads I eat, the more raw vegetables I eat, the worse I feel, the more bloated I have. And then there's something called SIBO, right? So SIBO stands for small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. And it is acknowledged by few and far between GI doctors in traditional medicine right now. I do think in the next 5 years, it'll be something that everybody treats. But SIBO, basically, the bacteria in the large intestine are kind of creeping up into the small intestine where they're not supposed to be. So then you get this bloating and distension, and you can have constipation or you can have loose stools from that. So why fiber is so important, that is because fiber is it basically builds up our short chain fatty acids, right? Which are those, like the way I describe them, those are like those the soldiers at that gut lining border to say like, hey, virus, bacteria, you guys go ahead and stay out. Anything that's going to be beneficial, go ahead and come on. Well, if you don't have any short chain fatty acids, right, you're setting yourself up to a lot of intestinal dysbiosis, right? You're letting a lot of bacteria that shouldn't grow, go too hot, leaky gut. Exactly. And so fiber, right, there's particular fibers for my patients with SIBO. I'll direct them towards a different fiber that's like made for people with dysbiosis. If you're taking a regular fiber and you have some of those bloating, distension, there's probably something in the gut that we need to kill off or kind of look at a little bit deeper for sure. And so I do think, these are my patients, like looking back, I'm like, how many patients I admitted for colonoscopies, right? And they would have a colonoscopy and they're like, yeah, nothing showed up, which is great, but I still have my symptoms. And so then I'm like, okay, I wonder how many of these SIBO cases we're actually seeing, because this is super common. We don't eat very great diets in the US. Like there's a lot that builds up into that. So I love fiber. It's the number one supplement to help your blood pressure, your cholesterol, all those things. So we could, like I said, we could talk about that for a whole hour, but it helps everything, right? Your microbiome's huge on that. It also pulls toxins. So it's really important to have.
Most definitely. And besides vegetables, you have oatmeal as a fiber source. What else would be, whole wheat?
Yeah, those are the biggest one. You can do a supplement. Your vegetables, your fruits, your like you said, your grains, if you do eat those, beans can have high fiber cruciferous vegetables, I would say. For patients with SIBO though, like those are the basically, if you eat raw vegetables, you eat raw fiber, and you're feeding those the bad bacteria that are not overgrown, right? The way to get around that is you could cook your vegetables. You can cook, you change the proteins in them to make them more digestible, so you're not having those kind of gross symptoms with it, for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing how much, the hormone regulation and how we feed ourselves also translates into how we feed animals. Pigs, monogastrics, have one stomach, very similar to humans.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the signaling mechanisms and the way that the nutrients is digested is very similar between the species. And so I think it's always really interesting how you can apply, practices and knowledge from one subset area.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You mentioned cortisol and how being able to control that is very important to help regulate the rest of your hormones. So we like to leave our audience with an action item at the end of the podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think an action item for this week would be, maybe, do you have any tools that you recommend to your patients or that you practice yourself to help kind of control that cortisol level and in turn help regulate the rest of your hormones?
Yeah, totally. In research, right, the number one thing you can do to help your cortisol is to go for like a slow walk first thing in the morning as the sun's going up. That's what it'll show. It plays a role in your melatonin and all the things that kind of go into that hormonal response. So that is one thing for sure. There are certain apps that you can download, right? There's Headspace and Calm that kind of help, because again, like I can give you supplements like adaptogens, right? I can give you things to kind of help support your adrenals a little bit, but if there's still a fire going on and we can't put that out, like that's why it's those external things that it's really up to you to figure out what feels good for you. What activity do I do where I can just, and when you go for a walk, right? I was terrible at this. Like I would go for a walk, right? And I'm thinking about 90,000 things that I need to do when I get home, and I got a to-do list. Half the time I take out my phone and start like putting stuff in my phone. I'm like, no. Like when you go for a walk, you should be really, honestly, as like cheesy as this may sound, like you should be looking at the leaves on the trees. Like you should be looking at, the therapeuticness of that. There's a huge gain in that. So it's going for a walk and supporting your adrenals at the same time. So either a walk, whatever's going to make you feel good. If exercise makes you feel good, perfect. If exercise makes you feel tired, that's what we were getting at. Like, and not tired, but like fatiguing, tired, I need to go sleep on the couch right now. There's an online program Drew and I like to recommend. It's called the Gupta program, and the Gupta program is like a brain retraining program. So it can be really help with like retraining the nervous system a little bit, like a brain rewiring. It really helps with like our fatigue patients, our mold patients. It's like they have like a free 30-day trial. So that is where I start with a lot of my patients, because it's like guided feedback, right? For a lot of us that are really high, go getters, right? That meditation. Yes, right. Like it's like I don't have 10 minutes to myself. Are you kidding? Like I can't do this. I don't have 10 minutes today, which is crazy when you think about it. But I feel like you have to kind of search it out a little bit, and you have to know what feels good for you, for sure.
So it's going to be unique for every single individual.
For sure. Absolutely.
But yeah, I think it's finding what helps you individually. Yes. But it's nice that there are a lot of different options that
and even if it's try. Like if it's a massage once a month, like what gets you in your right mind space to know that I have something that's going to give me that adrenal support and that response that I get from that. Because stress is the biggest roadblock to long-term health, right? If you're just chronically stressed, doesn't matter what we do hormonally, doesn't matter. It's you have to support those adrenals for sure.
You just mentioned how stress plays so much into just your longevity and your overall health. Is it being in a state of constant stress that causes rewiring or abnormalities?
Yeah.
Or is it just like, I would say, spikes of stress? Or how do you class the stress component of that.
Yeah. So chronic long-term stress. When I talk about cortisol, I talk about external and internal triggers, right? External is like work, life, family. Internal is like I have a chronic gut infection, or my hormones have been off for months, or I have, these internal symptoms, right? And so the answer to your question, I think more like long-term stress, right? Because we all have spikes. Whether you have a baby, right? You have a high cortisol spike during that time. Whether you have a fight with your husband or your spouse, like there's a spike there, right? Like, so that repeated spikes, those are going to happen every single day. But it's when your cortisol response is in such that fight or flight. So whether it's a mold issue, whether it's a Lyme issue, whether it's a thyroid's off and I can't balance my thyroid, or my hormone, whatever it may be, right? Those are still stressors. So, but yeah, those spikes, very common. Everybody goes through them. But the chronic long-term stressors that's downstream start to suppress your immune system or activate it. So yeah, I would say the chronic long-term stress. But I have patients that, they've been stressed at their job, and then they go home and they're stressed at home, and then they're stressed, every single part of their life is stressful. And then that's where that conversation is like, we got to figure out, we have to start doing some brain retraining, or there's devices like dolphin stim or vagal nerve systems. Like there's training programs that can help a lot with that, for sure.
That's awesome. Well,
yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
Walk us through the hormones and how our gut and brain talk back and forth together. Is there anything else that you wanted to add at all?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, we're open books. Obviously, our practice is in Monona, Wisconsin right now, and so we just moved there from Fitchburg. So for our local people, I would say like Edgerton's like 20 minutes. Like it takes me 21 minutes to get to work. It's not that far. So
put a plug in for your podcast.
Yeah. So Dr. Drew and I, my husband and I, we are going to start it's been under wraps or under construction for like 3 months. I just need to just sit down and do it because we've just been so busy. But it's called the Vitality Blueprint, and we're going to be discussing, every week's going to be a little bit different. We're going to bring on some experts in the hormone field, in the longevity space, in the mold space, and the kind of, just the different types of medicine that I think is really important for patients to be, educated on, and like what should they be asking their doctor for. And if they can't get those lab tests, then find a functional medicine or an integrative practitioner to help you get through your health challenges and to make your future health great. So we're going to be just kind of diving into a lot of stuff.
Well, I look forward to listening to it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.